More than almost anything we talk about on the channel, today's story is actually going to tangibly impact you. So, for 5 years, there's been a battle waging at the highest levels of the games industry. It's massive, it's between Apple, it's between Epic, and it's around the principle of fairness. And the big news today is that Apple just lost. But they didn't lose because Epic Games outmaneuvered them or any kind of insane gigabrain play from Tim Sweeney. No, they lost because, in the words of the judge presiding over this decision, Apple leadership quote, outright lied under oath, and in deciding not to comply with legal injunctions, Tim Cook, quote, chose poorly. It's an ominous thing for a judge to be saying to you. This, though, is a dramatic case. It has impacts that will reverberate across the entire games industry, and honestly, far wider than that, meaning it truly will impact everyone who watches this video. Here's how all this started. So, Tim Sweeney is a man on a mission, and it's a mission that's cost him and his company more than $1 billion over the last 5 years. It's fair to say that he's pretty committed. Now, 5 years ago is when he decided that Apple and Google's exclusive storefronts on their mobile platforms were in fact unreasonable monopolies. In his opinion, essentially, he says that they don't earn their 30% fee, rather they impose it, and that because of that, they're restricting how developers could make money and what sort of deals that they could actually offer to consumers. So what he decided to do was force their hand. So he started something called Project Liberty, and here's how it worked. Fortnite suddenly got an option where users could buy currency directly from Epic. Right? Directly, not through your Apple payment or Google payment thing. That, of course, meant that Apple and Google immediately booted Fortnite because it did break their store policies. And this is exactly what Tim Sweeney actually wanted. He wanted his game to be kicked off. And we pretty much know that because Epic immediately filed lawsuits that they had been preparing, and these were designed to force the stores to change those policies. Now, in the case of Google, it actually went so much better than any of us could have expected. Evidence actually emerged that certain developers like Activision had been paid not to rock the boat, and that they deleted documents and were broadly proven to have acted unfairly. They lost on all counts as determined by a jury. The platform was opened up to new stores and Google have appealed. It was a complete win for Epic, but their fight against Apple is an entirely different story. Things have begun to look quite bad for Epic. You see, the outcome of that initial trial, the original one, was an almost complete defeat for Epic Games. They basically could not prove being the emphasis word there, that any kind of monopoly or unfair action was going on. But there was one exception. An injunction was placed against Apple, and this was to end anti-steering provisions. You might think, what is anti-steering? Well, it's actually pretty simple. So basically, it meant that Apple could no longer prevent developers from directing users to make purchases outside of the store. So basically, steering you, the customer, somewhere else. So as an example, that would be buying V-Bucks in Fortnite through a web client rather than through Apple's purchasing system, which would thus avoid Apple's 30% cut. Now, at the time, the judge said that Apple should be entitled to something, but that they can't force people to use their in-app purchase systems. Apple then spent 3 years appealing, and it's Apple, they can afford lawyers, but they really got nowhere on that front. And this is when that same judge came back and filed a new injunction against Apple for their behavior in the last 3 years. And this one truly is remarkable, and depending on how things shake out, there could even be a criminal component. It's quite wild. So, it wasn't just for a lack of compliance with the original order, but for contempt of court, which is usually frowned upon. So much so that they've been referred to the US Attorney's Office to consider criminal contempt proceedings. That would be dramatic. Now, the judge essentially was not pleased that Apple implemented new costly fees around off-app purchases, where basically they were effectively replacing one anti-competitive process with another, meaning of course, devs lose, but also us customers lose. And while they were doing all that, they were also misleading the court over what they were doing. Here's a quote. "That it thought this court would tolerate such insubordination was a gross miscalculation. As always, the cover-up made it worse. For this court, there is no second bite of the apple." Yeah, GG judge, quite the zinger. So she laid out then some clear rules. These are practices that Apple are banned from. Number 1, imposing a fee on purchases made outside an app. That means that they have no reason, therefore, to track those purchases, the ones made outside an app. Ban number 2, setting conditions on how devs can direct users outside of an app, including restricting how links work. Basically, you know those design anti-patterns that are just trying to get you, the consumer, to clearly do something by, making a link look weird or misleading design, that sort of thing. Third, banning certain types of app from directing users to outside purchases. And finally, using, quote, emotive language to persuade consumers to remain in the in-store purchase system, basically scaring people who don't know better. And, well, we've actually seen Apple do similar things, saying you can go and make a purchase, not using the App Store, but, you know, the App Store is very secure and very safe, which, to an average person who's not tech savvy, could basically look like it's Apple saying, hey, you could get scammed if you don't click this link. P.S. This link gets us lots of money too. And of course, the reason why these things are banned is, well, because Apple had been doing all of these things. That's what's led to this whole case. Now, in response, they have now begun complying and appealing. It'll be interesting to see how malicious their compliance is. I imagine it will be as malicious as is humanly possible without getting in even more trouble. But all of this is happening while the rest of the industry is licking its lips. Some developers already had updates to go in this. Spotify were a major one. They framed this as a huge consumer win, which in fairness, I would say it absolutely is. Now we can do insane things like manage our subscriptions in an app. We can use different payment options and we can see costs. You can now buy Kindle books in the Kindle app. Patreon memberships are no longer marked up on iOS to counteract the store tax, and lots of things. But of course, let's bring it back to Tim Sweeney and Epic Games. So, the Epic Games Store mobile version already existed as of last year, but now they are really ramping things up. Within a week of the ruling, Epic announced their web store fee would drop to 0% for your first $1 million in revenue, with that starting this June. That's obviously pretty awesome if you're a dev. Plus, much like they have done with the Epic Online Services stuff, what they've done with the store is they've built a solution that people can use regardless of platform. So, be it Google, be it Apple, anything. But more than that, it doesn't need to be the literal Epic Games Store. That's because web shops can basically run on their infrastructure, and that will let any developer go outside Apple's payment system with no fuss. Yes, Tim Sweeney's definitely taken this one personal, and you know what? I'm here for the drama. Anyway, it is great for devs, but players are also being incentivized here, where you're going to get 5% reward points through purchases on those shops and the Epic Games Store, but that's boosted to 20% until the end of August. So that essentially is the big clap back against Apple. But there is the other thing, the Fortnite. So Tim Sweeney has proposed that Fortnite can return to app stores within weeks, like super quick, provided Apple allows them to do so. He also said he'll drop all litigation as part of a peace plan, provided Apple roll out this policy worldwide. And instead, as of the time of writing and recording this video, Apple have, went and blocked the Fortnite submission. Now, of course, all of this legal maneuvering so far is only in the US. The current policy implementation on Apple's side only applies in that region right now. Fortunately, though, for those of us benefiting from EU rules, we've already had some things for months already, and Apple can't stop it. An absolute bomb was dropped in the industry in March of this year when both Google and Apple were found to be in breach of the Digital Markets Act by the EU Commission. And this is pretty damn big stuff. They can absolutely sting these companies. So with Google, it was for anti-steering practices, and Apple was for blocking third parties from interfacing with their systems. Now this follows last August's, told you we'd come back to that, ruling that Apple had to open their platform up to alternative stores, and another breach from Apple in April of this year, also on steering. Now, in that last case, they also faced a cool little €500 million fine for what was absolutely flagrant breaches of the law. Apple are obviously appealing because that's what you do when you're a company, but there's a clear thing, there's a clear trend. The tide is absolutely shifting. Now, it's not going to happen in all regions, but we are seeing regulation over major platforms to protect consumer interests from companies who otherwise would control them. So between that and, I guess, a billionaire slap fight led by Tim Sweeney, well, look, we should take these wins when we can get them. Not to bring up an old drama, and it is a bit of a different story, but I suppose a little bit like how Hulk Hogan versus Gawker was, in fact, Peter Thiel versus Gawker, this is all kind of billionaire slap fights. Now, the thing with Tim Sweeney, right? He does have good principles. There are good principles that he talks about, right? And yes, it's good he's trying to hold Apple to those, but that does not make Tim Sweeney automatically on your side. Sometimes it just so happens that we're aiming at the same target. Now, he will end up benefiting from this massively, and in a financial way. And of course, that's because his company is the one building the wraparound solutions that power these out-of-app purchases. And that's really big. And that means that we can appreciate the consumer good that this does. We absolutely can. And the work that the regulators are doing to break down these walled gardens. And in an ideal world, right, once the walled garden is so big and so ubiquitous, you might have to, restrict the freedom of Apple to go and run a monopoly, because not only will it be good for consumers, it will also be good for competition. But I also do think, Standard Oil gets broken up. Who's left with the money to gobble up all the assets? Oh, pretty much the same people. So there's always that thing then where you can have these good pro-consumer regulations, but it's the incumbents with the resources who are immediately able to get around them or exploit the new opportunity. And Epic Games basically, doing its store as a backend to do payment providing for everybody else, well, while it is good because it means there is more competition, it also does disproportionately benefit Tim Sweeney. So, Tim Sweeney, you know what? You have led to a domino of events that I think is absolutely good for consumers, and I think it's good for developers. But that does not mean we will not be critical of you. And on the topic of the good guys being, let's just say, a little bit rumbly, okay, we have to talk about Capcom, and the good news is you can actually watch that video right now. The link is about to replace my face on the screen.